Parents who have disowned or genuinely stopped loving your child. What happened? My mom ceased all contact with my much older half-brother from a different dad. He was a violent, angry addict, would steal from and beat up my grandparents and my mom. She finally had enough. He died this year and it's the first time my mom had seen him since she cut him off 15ish years ago. I now have my own kids and I've always supported my mom's decision. That said, I feel so sorry for her. No reason than when I was just her kid. I can't imagine ever reaching that point with my kids and I'm sure she never did either. My parents stopped loving me the moment I was disfellowshipped as a Jehovah's Witness, and I was promptly kicked out. I knew nothing of how to live on my own at the time, but I had a decent job and survived. My brother stopped associating with them 2 years later and lives with me, and they since moved away, 1,500 miles away to be exact. It's easier to tell people I am orphan or that I do not have parents, cause it's hard to explain how they would stop loving or want to associate with their own son over some stupid cult rules. I have been legally disowned by my father. When I was 11, my mum was diagnosed with terminal cancer. This was her second diagnosis in around 4 years. Obviously she recovered the first time after intense surgery and a lot of chemo, and he did not want to look after her like he did before. He also had a new GF and her family to look after apparently, and he had no issues leaving us. When my mum passed away when I was 14, my brother, grandmother, him and I met up to discuss who I was going to live with. The plan was my brother and his family. Father was never considered, and he showed up and declared that he was in the process of going to court to legally emancipate himself from me. He went out of his way to legally declare that I was no longer his child, just so that my brother, 22-year with a wife and 2 young children already struggling on one paycheck, couldn't seek child support. Needless to say, it stung coming only days after my mother's funeral. What an ass. Hugs to you. Peace to your mom. My biological father divorced my mom and also his 3 kids, basically bouncing out of our lives and making it clear he wanted next to nothing to do with any of us when he left. Man, years later, at my older sister's funeral, that he had the freaking gall to attend, I asked him why he did that. He said, "I thought it would be easier for everyone." He actually meant it was easier for him to run home to his wealthy family and enjoy a second adolescence while my single mother worked 2 jobs to feed 3 kids under 10 with 0 child support from him. Our fathers are 2 in the same. Crappy. My mother simply didn't want kids but never bothered to prevent having all 3 of us to different men. She tried to have my dad put in jail for abuse. Meanwhile he was working 2 jobs to support us and would come home to a filthy house and my diaper completely loaded. She put all 3 of us in foster care and luckily my dad got me along with my other half sister's dad got her, but the oldest of us spent 18 years of her life in foster care. I last saw my mother when I was 6 because she had seen that my dad was successful and wanted to use him for money. He brought me to her park to meet her and she blatantly ignored me and instead was all over my dad. He's a smart man and realized this, and that's the last time I ever saw her. She never sent one birthday card or ever paid a dime of child support to my dad because she didn't want kids and wouldn't take any steps to prevent it 3 separate times. Congrats mom, you're the world's biggest POS. My mother was disowned by her parents for her interracial relationship. Edit. There's been some discussion below so I'm going to put it up here along with a little more detail. Yes, we are from the South, Arkansas. There are parts of this that are weird too. My mother initially lied to her parents and said she was dating an Arab man. This was fine, but they found out she was lying, leading to her being disowned. I guess in the early 70s Arabs were okay but blacks were no numbers. They disowned my mom, but it was fine if we came over. My older sister was close with them, but me and my younger sister always felt weird going over there. They adored my older sister though when she stayed over and went on vacation with them among other things. I remember asking my grandfather why he didn't like my mother when I was about 8 or 9 years old at a cousin's birthday party. He just walked away. These same people who essentially pushed her out of their lives were the same ones she took care of and comforted in their darkest times. She sort of went back to them and they didn't push her away for what I am assuming is they knew the end was near and they were trying to right their wrongs. I have no idea, just an assumption. She was there with them until their ends though. My mom might not be perfect, but dang, that made me look at her in a completely different light. I'd love to hear my mother's explanation, although she hasn't contacted me for over 20 years, so I know that's not going to happen. I think you're more likely to get responses from the kids. I disowned a family member, not a child though. We were very close, until he ended up being caught in a pedo sting. Then I turned my back and haven't looked back. I have a sister the age of the girl he was supposed to meet. I can't associate with scum like that. For your information, according to my sister, nothing was ever done to her. My wife left me and took our son from me when he was 6 weeks old. I fought for over 5 years to see him, but in the end had to protect my own sanity. The feeling of that parental love turning into just a feeling of his existence is something you simply can't describe. He will come to meet you eventually, probably AMD hopefully. Other way round. My father had this incredible stupid bee as a wife. She is just terrible. She left him, owned me quite a bit of money, cheated on my father and on and on. After 3 years of marriage, she is around 36 and my father is 50. He did everything for her and she just made him miserable. But he kept going. When she left my father, he became really depressed and I cared for him, hoping that he would get over the whole situation, etc. We even fought the whole divorce together. He got better and everything. I was really happy for him. Then came the day that she had no money left and she came back to my father. He told me about it and I was so angry that he didn't learn from the story before. I told him that I don't want to see her ever again and I won't do anything with him if she's there as well. The day came when my father and I wanted to meet for lunch. As I arrived, I saw her sitting there with him. I went to the place and said that she had to leave or I'm gonna leave. He became mad at for that and I left. He tried to do the same move again. I told him to frick off and never spoke to him again. I never trusted this woman. It became better and then I found out about her cheating, lying and everything. She told me to frick off when I wanted my money back. I won't trust her ever again, but I can't help my dad. I told him everything and he is still blind through those love curtains. Sounds like my dad. He will stick up for my narcissistic mother until he's blue in the face. I went no contact with her, but told him that he could come and visit me and his, at the time, newborn granddaughter anytime he wanted. Nope, wouldn't do it without mom. It eventually got to the point where it became a lost cause and I realized we'll never have a relationship as long as mom is alive. I'm the 15-year daughter. Often my mom used to say that I didn't love her. Each day it got worse and worse. The affirmations from her saying that started getting to me, and soon enough, I really did stop loving her. She's not an alcoholic, but there have been quite a few nights where she came home very intoxicated and said horrible things to my brother and me. She lies often. I've caught her stealing my money for her gambling addiction. She wastes $200-300 weekly on lotto tickets. About 80% of the time she's not even paying with her money. She is so irresponsible that she's been fired from around 6 jobs in the span of 2 years. I get called many horrible names daily by her. One major thing she does that bugs me is after her screaming session, she'll try to make it up to me, and when I don't reciprocate her affection, she blames our horrible relationship on me. Didn't want to make this super depressing, but I guess that escalated quickly. I'm sorry your life is so hard right now. Keep a solid head on your shoulders and you'll have a wonderful future. If there is someone at school you can speak to, it might be worth doing so. My mum got taken out of my grandparents' will, and she only got to know so because of her sister. Her side of the family has always been very conservative and rather communal, so till death do us apart is serious business with them. When she ran away for over a week without giving any notice, leaving me and my sister alone, only to come back with some stranger we couldn't tell anyone they were living with us. It was obvious things were about to get hairy. She divorced and remarried in the span of about 6 months, trying to keep everyone in the family out of the loop. I wouldn't be surprised if someone learned about it through the invitation to the party. Cries and drama ensured that day. She wasn't invited to the Christmas family reunion, and she used me and my sister as bargaining chips. They took away from her anything that was still in their name. She moved away, and only recently has she been trying to connect back. Why did she get divorced in the first place anyway? I went out with a woman who had a 22-year-old son that she disowned forever. She didn't like to talk about him at first, but one day she just told me that she caught him molesting his 8-year-old cousin when he was 20 years old, while the rest of the family was having dinner downstairs, including the 8-year-old's mother. I didn't ask anything more than that. I can answer for my mother. I cut contact from her, but from what I hear nowadays she hates me for ruining her life. First awful thing I did. My mother purchased her first home when I was 12. She had always had this vision of me having a house and playing in the backyard as a child, and I think she felt like I was missing out by living in apartments all my life. Thing was, I had no desire to move out of where we were, and probably more importantly, she couldn't really afford a house, plus this was just around the housing crisis as well, so the price was super inflated and dropped significantly a year later. We only lived there a year before moving in with her at the time boyfriend and renting it out. I apparently was the sole reason that she purchased that house. She did that for me, so it was my fault that she bought a house she couldn't afford. Second awful thing I did. She got pulled over while driving to a nearby city because she was swerving on the freeway. I was 13 at the time and had fallen asleep, but got woken up by the car shaking back and forth and almost hitting a semi while she was asleep at the wheel. I woke her up and she insisted on pushing through, and not too long after she was pulled over by an undercover cop. I watched as she was failing the sobriety test hard. She fell a couple of times trying to walk in a straight line. I cooperated with police and gave over the prescriptions she had in the car with her. So basically that was an act of betrayal. She was in the medical field and was struggling to keep a job that would hire her with a record, charged with child endangerment. So she was driving while heavily medicated, but I took most of the blame because I wasn't loyal to her and sold her out to the police. So now her finances are in shambles and can't keep a job in her field because of the awful things I did as a teenager. Her career is ruined because of me. A lot more happened to damage our relationship, but I think she would identify these two things as the main reasons having me as a child ruined her life. I disowned my older sister. It was always it's either I get my way or I'll throw the biggest fit. She would always talk crap about my parents, how they never give her anything when they really were. Bought her a really expensive dress for a beauty pageant when they were struggling financially. Helped with taking care of her car. Asked for money from them. And other stuff. The guys she would date were all buttholes and that would cause my dad to stress and worry about her. She would always cause problems for my parents. I remember my dad having to go to the hospital because he had really high blood pressure due to the level of stress she was causing one night, and she thought he was faking it. Besides that, she was one of my biggest bullies I had growing up. Our fights would turn into fist fights. When I was 19, my parents and sisters, I have an older and little sister, and I had our first family therapy session, and I basically laid out everything I have been feeling about her and my relationship with her. Obviously, it didn't make our relationship better because she felt like she did nothing wrong. It's been 10 years after that and it was the last time I had a conversation with her, and my life has been a little less stressful since I don't have to be walking on eggshells. Whenever she's around I don't even look at her. I'm just so tired of her thinking that my parents don't love her and her bullying me that I decided to cut her out of my life after that therapy session. I don't regret it. I disowned my stepmom for shooting my cats, killing them and threatening to do the same to my dog. There are many more insane stories. Unfortunately my dad doesn't understand. He has issues also. My dad disowned my half-sister, his biological daughter. She had a fling with a guy, had her third child, and he beat her up and ditched her. She had her kids taken away from her because of the unsafe environment her boyfriend put the family in, so she turned to drugs like H&M. She also started shoplifting. She was arrested multiple times for drug use and shoplifting. She refused to go to court on the date she was supposed to go. This kept happening for a year until she finally told my dad she wanted to get help. He paid for her to go to rehab. She doesn't go. She just keeps asking for money, and he keeps giving it to her thinking she really needed it. Nope, just drugs. So he stops giving her money. She goes missing for a few days. Turns out she dead and was wandering across Mississippi. She was arrested, let out, stayed in a halfway house, then went back on drugs and shoplifted again. She's currently in jail and won't be able to get out that easily this time. My parents have tried for several years, but they just can't anymore. She's in her 30s, and you just can't force someone to get rehab. They want to have to change their life, and if she doesn't, there's no point. I'd love to read my dad's reply here. 10 years this Christmas since he disconnected both phones and moved house without telling me where or why. He cut off both of his adult children when my parents' divorce got finalized and never looked back. I wonder if we ever cross his mind. Not the disowned child, but my older brother is. He has been a petty crook as long as I could remember, into hard drugs since his pre-teens, and pretty much a full-blown sociopath. He treated every girl in his life like meat. I remember him as a teenager calling his girlfriend a and because she didn't want to blow him. When he knocked some chick up years later, he had a daughter, and one of the first things out of his mouth in the hospital after her birth was she's gonna grow up to be a W like her mom. Let's just say that child is better off not having him as a father figure. She's been adopted since then and is living a happy childhood last time I checked. He treated my parents like trash. He would be in and out of jail and they would take him in whenever he was out. Then he'd find a job, lose it, and go back to jail. Rinse and repeat. He would get in physical fights with my mom, dad, me. He'd kick our dogs, cats, etc. We'd have to get new drywall to replace the holes he punched through those walls. He'd have freakouts and smash things all around the house. Living with him was a nightmare. The last straw was him walking out on his kid into her mother and starting a gang fight at our house over a drug deal gone wrong. Things got really violent and I'm pretty sure weapons were involved. He left the house, and on that very same night, he came back because he needed a place to stay. When my dad said no, he started fighting my dad. I stepped in at that point and almost beat the heck out of him. No one fricks with my dad. No one. It ended with my dad having to hold me down to stop me from killing him, and my brother walking away down the street yelling obscenities. Haven't seen him since. This was 6 years ago. At this point, he's either in jail or dead. I may have every reason in the world to hate him for everything he's done, but I don't. He's a tortured soul who has let his demons get the absolute best of him. Plain and simple. I just hope that he finds some kind of peace, even if it takes death for him to do so. Bill, if you're reading this, you're my brother and I still love you, and I hope you're okay, wherever you are. Called his girlfriend a because she didn't want to blow him. Didn't want to blow him. I signed away my parental rights to my daughter. It sounds terrible, but here is the backstory. My ex-wife and I separated for a while. Then we briefly reconciled. We had sex exactly once. We were working things out and then she says there's been another man in the picture and the kid isn't mine. She wants a quick, clean divorce. I refuse to proceed with the divorce until paternity is sorted out. DNA test is finally done and what do you know? It's mine. I deploy to Afghanistan. When I get back, finally get a hearing for the divorce. It took a judge's order to finally allow me to see my daughter. She was already walking when I saw her for the first time. Fast forward 1.5 years and I am flat broke, killing myself to travel 600 miles on weekends to see my daughter for just a few hours, if at all. The ex was pulling no-shows and showing up late for my scheduled visits. When my daughter called me other daddy, I knew I didn't have a chance. I knew that my ex was going to badmouth me and undermine me every chance she got. I signed away my rights shortly thereafter. She is 16 years old now. Once she is 18, I'll be able to contact her. I hope you can salvage something of that relationship, friend. I disowned my grandparents on my dad's side. My dad's parents are both divorced and remarried to different people. His father is great, lovely guy and super helpful when we need it. His mother and her husband are a real piece of work. She moved to Spain when I was maybe around 11-year-old. When I was 16/17 my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer. My grandfather and nana were super helpful. Took him to appointments. Picked my brother and I up from activities. Generally being a great help in a difficult time. My grandmother and her sea of a husband, however, flew back from Spain just to tell us that they will not be helping with anything. That she is mainly focused on her knee replacement surgery in Spain. So at that point I decided I wanted nothing to do with her. I haven't as much as spoken to her in over 6 years and have no intention of speaking to her again. She as good as disowned my father in his most difficult moments, and that cannot be forgiven. My father survived his cancer. He's healthy and happy now. My parents got divorced and my mother decided she didn't want to be a mother anymore, so she neglected my sibling and I and kicked us out of her house. Because the court system favors the mother, she got custody despite nobody asking us or looking too far into it, and my dad had to give her the house and child support. Despite this, she didn't do anything for us and we ended up living with him anyways, and she spent our child support on world travels and wouldn't ever buy us anything. She met a guy, sponsored him. He had a son and that became her son. I was now nothing to her. They divorced. He stole all her money and she ended up homeless until family took her in, and it's been shaky since. She went off the deep end about a year ago and I tried to get involved to help her, but she kept being demeaning and went crazy. Got arrested and I cut off ties. She threatened to come shoot me and I called the police and even went to try and make a police report, but nobody would listen to me and the guy at the counter at the police station laughed at me. It was very bizarre. The guy at the counter should be fired. You have a job. Do it properly. These type of people disgust me. Ugh. Okay, so far everyone is disowning their parents, but no parents disowning no longer loving their children. Interesting. Because it's a younger demographic, or do parents not want to talk about it? I'm dealing with an ex-wife that has alienated my kids. They don't see me. Ex is pretty much in dire need of a therapist. She's done a job on my kids. At some point I'll need to walk away from my own sanity. My grandma disowned my father because of the way he acted towards the family. He used to tell my mother that his father once chained him in the basement when he was a teenager and his sister secretly brought him food. He also told my mother that his father used to beat him. But around the time my parents separated, he suddenly started arguing it was all his mother's doing. However, his sister was a witness back then and saw everything that happened. Plus his father, my grandpa, was always very shady. Eventually my father disowned my grandma first, so his sister and my grandma disowned him as well. My grandma keeps saying until today that if he gets help with his psychological problems, changes and comes back on his own will, she would acknowledge him again and accept him back into the family with open arms. Just that my father will never do that because he keeps dwelling on the past that he made up with his own mind. It's pretty obvious because he also keeps twisting things concerning my mother, where I obviously trust my mother way more than him. TLDR. My father disowned his mother, my grandma, so his sister and my grandma disowned him as well. My grandfather disowned his daughter-in-law and grandson after my uncle passed. The actual reason given was after my uncle passed, his widow reduced communication between the kid and my grandparents. A few months later, my grandmother passed. Total communication blackout. Nothing to acknowledge birthdays, Christmas, nothing. My grandfather would try to call every couple of weeks. On the same day and time he and my grandmother always called them. Never got an answer. Sent birthday and holiday cards to the kid. No response. After about 5 years of this, he cut them out of the will. Kid only got a tiny bit from my grandmother's will since she still had him in there. The woman was not a great person. So while I'm sad my grandparents lost contact with one of their grandchildren, I'm glad the last few years of his life my grandfather didn't have to deal with his son's widow. My parents disowned me as I married a girl of my choice and not theirs. I'm in India, so arranged marriages are pretty much the norm. Funny thing is their marriage wasn't arranged. Theirs was a love marriage. An year after my son was born my mom started relationship with me and my son alone. My dad talks and loves to my son but doesn't even talks to me. Neither of them talk to my wife. Oh, I can definitely answer this, but from the other side of the story. My father has always been hot-headed and violent when I was growing up. I always dreaded coming home and as a result, I couldn't wait to be done with high school. I then moved out at 18 and have been living on my own since. This did not stop him from sending me long lecturing texts, calling me several times a day to check where I was, getting verbally aggressive when I don't pick up the phone fast enough, and nearly getting the police involved when I was attending a school banquet because I wasn't back at my dorm by 7 PM. or leaving absurd long comments on my Facebook profile pictures about how to be a dutiful daughter. At the beginning of this year, I introduced my long-term boyfriend to the both immediate and extended family. I let my parents know that I was planning a 2 weeks long Europe trip with my BF 2 months in advance. That really set my father off. He wrote me a letter, recorded me an audio, yelled in my face through gritted teeth at a public restaurant, and told every family member that he was extremely ashamed of me. He explained that I was born to serve my parents, and doing this, going on my trip that I paid for without asking for his permission, is no different than betraying the social norms and displaying to the world how disrespectful I am of our culture. He has since cut all communication with me. I'm 25, Asian female, independent, working toward admission to grad school BTW. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.